All right, let's jump right into one of the most basic but powerful parts of English, how we describe things. But, it's more than just that. We're going to look at how we can dial those descriptions up or down, kind of like turning up the volume on an idea. We can take it from a simple statement all the way to the ultimate comparison. So, let's get into it. Good, better, best. I mean, you've heard that your whole life, right? It's pretty much the perfect, bite-sized example of what we're talking about today. You can literally hear the idea getting stronger with each word. But what are the actual rules behind that? How do we know exactly when to use each one? Well, that's the big question. And that's exactly what we're going to break down right now. Once you get a handle on these 3 degrees of adjectives, you'll see how you can describe the world with so much more precision. It really makes your language a lot more dynamic.
Okay, first up is our foundation. This is the starting point for pretty much all description, what we call the positive degree. So the positive degree is basically the default setting for any adjective. Just think of it as a standalone statement. It's just describing one thing, on its own terms, without comparing it to anything else at all. Take this for instance. The word beautiful here just describes the sky. That's it. We're not comparing it to yesterday's sky. We're not calling it the most beautiful sky ever. Nope. It's just a simple, direct observation. And it's the exact same idea here. Old just describes the car. Now, you might notice that word very, but even adding very just cranks up the intensity of the description. It doesn't actually create a comparison to another car. It's still just a statement about this one single car.
And one last one, good simply describes the person. See? This is that foundational, positive degree. It's simple, it's direct, and this is super important because this is our baseline for all the other comparisons we're about to make. But, okay, what happens when we do want to compare things, right? What if we want to say one car is older than another one? Well, that's when we need to kind of level up our adjective. So let's move on to the next degree and see how this whole thing builds. And that brings us right to our next level, the comparative degree. Now, just like the name suggests, this is where the real action starts. So the whole point of the comparative is to draw a line between two things and show how they're different. It can also be used to show that something is changing over time. Really, you can just think of it as the A versus B adjective. Here we go. This is that classic A versus B comparison we were just talking about. You've got George versus Tom, and that one word, harder, is what draws the line between them. And here's a little tip. That word then is almost always a dead giveaway that you're in comparative territory. Okay, now this one's a little more subtle because the comparison isn't always spelled out for you. When you say you need a bigger house, what are you comparing it to? You're comparing the house you want to the house you currently have. So it's a comparison between what is and what could be. And here's that other job it does, showing change over time. More expensive compares prices now to how they were before, right? It's showing a trend. So you can see comparatives can do 2 things, compare 2 separate items or compare the same item at 2 different points in time. So let's recap. We've covered describing one thing. We've covered comparing 2 things. But what if you have a whole group, a crowd? That's where we bring in the final, most powerful degree, the superlative. Yeah, this is the top of the pyramid, the big one. The superlative adjective singles out one thing from a group of 3 or more and says it's the absolute most or the absolute least of something. It's the champion, the winner, the one that stands out from all the rest. Just look at the difference here. Remember before, George studied harder than Tom. That was just a group of 2. But now he studies the hardest of all the students in the class. That's a much, much bigger group. And George is right at the very top. And it's important to remember that superlatives work at both ends of the spectrum. Oldest points to the very top of the age range, while youngest points to the very bottom. But in both cases, what are we doing? We're identifying that one person who holds that extreme quality within the whole group. This is a great example of just how massive that comparison group can be. We're not just talking about 3 or 4 films here. No, we're talking about every single film this person has ever seen. And the phrase most interesting elevates this one film above all of them. See? At the end of the day, that's what superlatives are for, crowning a champion. Okay, so there you have it, the 3 degrees of adjectives. Let's do a quick recap and see how they all fit together in your grammar toolkit. This table really lays it out all perfectly.
You start with the positive statement, right? The car is old. Simple. Then you compare two things with the comparative. My car is older. And finally, you single one out from a whole group with the superlative. That is the oldest car. You can see it's a really clean, logical progression from one to the next.
And that really wraps up our look at adjectives of degree. So I'll leave you with a final thought, using a superlative, of course. We went from the positive to the comparative and finally to the superlative. For you, what was the most useful piece of this whole puzzle? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.